When Queen Anne of Great Britain died in 1714, doctors made a discovery so disturbing they could barely document it. Her body had become something unrecognizable. 17 pregnancies had turned her womb into a biological graveyard, but what they found inside was even worse. Her remains were so grotesquely swollen that they had to build something no royal had ever needed before. Stay until the end to find out why her coffin had to be constructed in a shape that still haunts medical history. August 1714. The royal physicians standing over Queen Anne's lifeless body weren't prepared for what they were about to discover. As they began the post-mortem examination, the stench hit them first. Her abdomen was so massively distended that the initial incision released fluids that shouldn't exist in such quantities. But it was when they reached her reproductive organs that the true horror revealed itself. Her womb, the organ that had carried 17 pregnancies, looked nothing like what medical science had documented before. It was scarred beyond recognition, hardened in places, necrotic in others. Layers upon layers of damaged tissue told a story of biological warfare that had raged inside her body for decades. The physicians had performed autopsies on countless bodies, but this was different. This wasn't just death. This was destruction. Her internal organs bore the marks of a body that had been fighting itself for years, losing battle after battle. The Queen's womb had become a tomb, and what lay inside was evidence of one of the most catastrophic medical failures in royal history. They documented what they could, but some discoveries were too disturbing to fully record. The secret they found that day would haunt medical understanding for centuries. The level of internal corruption was staggering. Her uterus showed signs of multiple hemorrhages, adhesions that had fused organs together, and tissue that had essentially died while she was still alive. Modern forensic analysis of the historical accounts suggests she suffered from severe endometriosis, possible adenomyosis, and chronic pelvic inflammatory disease. But in 1714, doctors had no names for these conditions. All they knew was that her reproductive system had been ravaged. Her fallopian tubes were scarred and blocked. Her ovaries showed abnormalities consistent with repeated hormonal trauma. The placental attachments from her many pregnancies had left permanent damage, creating weak points in her uterine wall that never properly healed. Each subsequent pregnancy had built upon the damage of the previous one, creating a cascade of destruction. Her body had been trying to create life in an environment that had become increasingly hostile to it. The physicians found evidence of old internal bleeding that had never been properly reabsorbed. Pockets of infection that had calcified over time. Her abdominal cavity contained adhesions so severe that her organs had begun sticking to each other and to her abdominal wall. But the womb was just the beginning of the nightmare. As they continued the examination, the doctors realized that every major organ system showed signs of catastrophic failure. Her liver was enlarged and showed signs of chronic disease. Her kidneys bore the marks of years of strain. Her heart was weakened, struggling to pump blood through a body that had swollen to grotesque proportions. The gout that had plagued her final years had left deposits of uric acid crystals throughout her joints, visible even in death. Her legs, which had become so swollen she couldn't walk, were filled with fluid that had nowhere to go. The Queen's body had essentially been drowning from the inside. What they were seeing wasn't just the result of difficult pregnancies. This was systematic organ failure, a body that had been slowly shutting down for years while everyone focused on producing an heir. And the worst part? The pattern of destruction suggested something even more sinister was at play. But to understand that, you need to know about the 17 tragedies that created this biological graveyard. 17 times Queen Anne felt life growing inside her. 17 times hope filled the halls of the royal palace. And 17 times that hope died. The first pregnancy in 1684 ended in miscarriage. A daughter in 1685 lived only an hour. Another daughter in 1686 stillborn. A miscarriage in 1687. A son in 1688 who died minutes after birth. The list goes on, each entry more heartbreaking than the last. Mary, born 1690, lived 2 hours. George, born 1692, died within minutes. Another stillbirth in 1693. A miscarriage in January 1694. Mary, born April 1694, lived 2 years before succumbing to smallpox. Another miscarriage in 1695. A stillborn daughter in 1696. 2 miscarriages in 1697. Another stillbirth in 1698. A son in 1700 lived 2 hours. And finally, a daughter in 1700, stillborn. Only Prince William, Duke of Gloucester, born in 1689, survived past infancy. He lived to be 11 years old. When he died in 1700 from pneumonia, Anne's last hope of a surviving heir died with him. Can you imagine enduring that level of loss? Not once, not twice, but 17 times. Each pregnancy took a devastating toll on her body. In the 18th century, there was no understanding of allowing the body to recover between pregnancies. Anne was expected to keep trying, to keep producing heirs for the succession. Her body never had time to heal from one trauma before the next began. Medical records from the period describe her suffering from severe morning sickness, debilitating pain, and complications that modern doctors would recognize as signs of serious underlying conditions. She experienced what were likely multiple ectopic pregnancies, where the embryo implanted outside the uterus causing internal bleeding and excruciating pain. She suffered from hyperemesis gravidarum, extreme pregnancy sickness that left her bedridden and unable to eat. Some of her late-term stillbirths were likely caused by placental abruption, where the placenta separates from the uterine wall, cutting off oxygen to the baby. Others may have been caused by incompetent cervix, premature rupture of membranes, or severe preeclampsia. But without modern diagnostic tools, her physicians were essentially flying blind. They treated symptoms they could see, while the real problems destroyed her from within. Every failed pregnancy left more scar tissue, more damage, more inflammation. Her body was trying to tell her something was catastrophically wrong, but no one could hear it. The psychological trauma was equally devastating. Imagine carrying a child for months, feeling it move, preparing for its arrival only to give birth to death, again and again. Anne's letters from this period reveal a woman crushed by grief and guilt. She blamed herself for the failures, believing she was somehow being punished. The pressure from the royal court was immense. The succession of the British crown depended on her producing a Protestant heir. Every failed pregnancy was not just a personal tragedy, but a political crisis. Her husband, Prince George of Denmark, was supportive but ultimately powerless to help. The couple's private grief played out on a public stage, with every pregnancy announcement creating national excitement and every loss creating national mourning. By her final pregnancies in 1700, Anne was 35 years old, and her body was already showing signs of the catastrophic breakdown to come. The repeated trauma had created a perfect storm of reproductive failure. But what was actually happening inside her body? The answer reveals something terrifying about how biological systems can turn against themselves. Modern medical analysis of Queen Anne's case reveals what 18th century doctors couldn't possibly understand. She almost certainly suffered from antiphospholipid syndrome, also known as Hughes syndrome, an autoimmune disorder where the body produces antibodies that attack phospholipids, essential components of cell membranes. This condition causes blood clots to form inappropriately, leading to recurrent miscarriages and stillbirths. It's one of the most common treatable causes of recurrent pregnancy loss today, but in Anne's time, it was invisible and unstoppable. The antibodies would attack the developing placenta, causing clots in the tiny blood vessels that supplied oxygen and nutrients to the growing fetus. Without proper blood flow, the pregnancies failed. Some babies died in the womb. Others were born alive but too damaged to survive. The condition also explained her other symptoms. Antiphospholipid syndrome can cause kidney disease, which Anne developed. It can cause heart valve problems, which likely contributed to her heart failure. It creates a hypercoagulable state, where blood clots form too easily throughout the body. This may have contributed to the strokes and other vascular events that plagued her later years. But that wasn't the only condition destroying her. Evidence suggests she also suffered from systemic lupus erythematosus, another autoimmune disease that causes the immune system to attack the body's own tissues. Lupus can cause kidney failure, which Anne experienced. It causes severe joint pain and inflammation, which could have contributed to her arthritis-like symptoms. It creates a state of chronic inflammation throughout the body, accelerating organ damage. When combined with antiphospholipid syndrome, which often occurs alongside lupus, the result is devastating. Her immune system was literally at war with her reproductive system. Every pregnancy triggered an immune response that attacked the developing fetus as if it were a foreign invader. The placenta, which should have been a life-giving organ, became a battlefield. Inflammatory cytokines flooded her system. Blood clots formed in microscopic vessels. The fetus, unable to receive adequate oxygen and nutrients, either died in the womb or was born too compromised to survive. And with each failed pregnancy, the damage accumulated. Scar tissue formed, blood vessels were destroyed. The lining of her uterus became increasingly hostile to implantation. The terrifying reality is that Anne's body had become incompatible with pregnancy, but she kept trying anyway. Each attempt compounded the damage. The chronic inflammation from her autoimmune conditions created a toxic environment for fetal development. Her blood's tendency to clot meant that placentas couldn't function properly. The scar tissue from previous pregnancies meant that even if an embryo implanted successfully, it was doing so in damaged tissue with compromised blood supply. Modern fertility specialists would have immediately recognized the pattern and prescribed blood thinners, immunosuppressive medications, and careful monitoring. But in 1714, there was nothing. Just repeated attempts and repeated failures. Her womb wasn't cursed by supernatural forces. It was under siege by her own immune system, a biological betrayal that medical science couldn't yet comprehend. The hidden corruption was cellular, immunological, and absolutely merciless. And while her reproductive system was being destroyed, the rest of her body was preparing to follow. By her 40s, Queen Anne's body had entered a state of total rebellion. The gout started in her feet, a burning, agonizing pain that made walking impossible. Uric acid crystals, the byproduct of her body's inability to properly process purines, began depositing in her joints. Her big toes swelled first, turning red and inflamed, the pain so severe that even the weight of bedsheets was unbearable. But gout doesn't stop at the feet. It spread to her ankles, her knees, her hands, her elbows. Contemporary accounts describe her fingers becoming so swollen and deformed that she couldn't hold a pen to sign documents. She had to use a stamp instead. Her knees became so enlarged that bending them was impossible. The attacks of gout came in waves, each one leaving more permanent damage. Between attacks, she lived in constant fear of the next one. Her diet, rich in the meats and alcohol common to royal tables, only made it worse. But even if she had known to change it, the damage was already catastrophic. The uric acid wasn't just affecting her joints, it was being deposited in her kidneys, slowly destroying their function. Then came the swelling. Edema, the medical term for fluid retention, began to transform her appearance. It started in her legs and feet, which became so massively swollen that walking was impossible even when the gout pain temporarily subsided. The fluid accumulated because her heart was failing, unable to pump blood efficiently through her compromised circulatory system. Her kidneys, damaged by both gout and her autoimmune conditions, couldn't properly regulate fluid balance. Protein was leaking from her damaged kidneys into her urine, reducing the blood's ability to hold on to fluid. The result was catastrophic. Fluid began pooling in her legs, then her abdomen, then throughout her entire body. Her belly became distended, looking almost pregnant again, a cruel mockery of her reproductive failures. Her face became puffy and unrecognizable. Her arms swelled. Even her neck thickened. By her final year, she weighed nearly 300 pounds, much of it fluid that her failing organs couldn't process. Courtiers who had known her as a younger woman were shocked by the transformation. This wasn't simple weight gain. This was a body drowning in its own fluids, unable to maintain the basic processes that keep a human alive. The pain was unrelenting. Gout attacks could last for days or weeks. The swelling created pressure that was its own form of agony. Her skin stretched tight over the accumulated fluid, sometimes splitting and weeping. She couldn't lie down comfortably because the fluid in her abdomen pressed on her lungs, making breathing difficult. She slept propped up on pillows, gasping for air, her heart racing as it tried desperately to pump blood through a system that was failing. She couldn't walk, couldn't stand, could barely move. A special chair had to be constructed to carry her from room to room. The Queen of Great Britain, one of the most powerful women in the world, had become a prisoner in her own deteriorating body. And through it all, she remained conscious, aware, trapped inside this failing flesh. Her mind was sharp even as her body betrayed her. She knew what was happening. She felt every moment of the decline. The woman who had endured 17 pregnancies was now enduring a different kind of death, slower and more public. But what happened after she finally died revealed just how extreme her body's transformation had become. When Queen Anne died on August 1st, 1714 at Kensington Palace, the immediate problem wasn't grief or succession planning, it was logistics. Her body had become so enormously swollen, so grotesquely enlarged by the accumulated fluid and the ravages of her diseases, that a standard royal coffin wouldn't work. Coffin makers were summoned urgently to the palace, where they faced a challenge unprecedented in royal history. How do you build a coffin for a queen whose body no longer resembles a human form? The measurements they took were shocking. Her body's width was nearly equal to its length. The traditional elongated rectangular shape of a coffin, designed to accommodate the natural proportions of the human body, wouldn't fit. After consultations and calculations, they made a decision that would echo through history. They would build the coffin almost square. Not slightly wider than usual, not moderately adjusted, nearly square. The implication was horrifying. This was a woman who had been 5 feet tall. Her coffin needed to be almost as wide as it was long. Contemporary accounts described the coffin's unusual dimensions with barely concealed shock. One observer noted it was of great size and almost square. Another described it as requiring significantly more wood than any royal coffin in memory. The carpenters worked through the night, constructing this bizarre final resting place. They reinforced it heavily because the weight was enormous. The combination of her physical mass and the lead lining required for royal burials meant the coffin would be almost impossible to carry. Special supports had to be built into the floor of St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, where she would be interred, to ensure the floor could bear the weight. The pallbearers had to be chosen not for their rank, but for their physical strength. This wasn't the dignified royal funeral anyone had imagined. It was an engineering challenge. The coffin became a physical manifestation of what her diseases had done to her body. It was a wooden testimony to the extreme nature of her physical destruction. No amount of royal protocol or careful language could hide the reality. The Queen's body had been so devastated by disease that it required a uniquely shaped coffin, something that had never been necessary before and would rarely be necessary again. The square coffin became the stuff of whispered conversations and historical footnotes. It was too unusual, too disturbing to ignore. In an era where royal deaths were carefully stage-managed affairs, this was an uncontrollable detail that spoke volumes. The coffin said what no courtier would dare speak aloud. The Queen had suffered catastrophically. Her body had been transformed into something monstrous by disease. No amount of royal dignity could erase that truth. And while the coffin was the most visible evidence of her body's destruction, it raised an even more disturbing question. What exactly had the autopsy revealed? What did the physicians see when they opened that massively swollen body? The answers would provide crucial insights into the biological catastrophe that had consumed the last Stuart monarch. But they would also reveal knowledge that medicine in 1714 wasn't ready to understand. The autopsy began with the external examination. The physicians documented the extreme edema, the swollen joints deformed by gout, the stretched and damaged skin. But it was the internal examination that revealed the full extent of the catastrophe. Her abdominal cavity, when opened, contained an enormous amount of fluid. Liters of it, far more than should accumulate even in severe heart failure. This was ascites, fluid that had leaked from her compromised blood vessels and failing organs, filling the space around her organs. Her liver was enlarged, hardened, showing signs of chronic congestion and damage. Modern pathologists reviewing the historical accounts believe she had developed cirrhosis, not from alcohol abuse but from chronic heart failure that caused blood to back up into her liver, slowly destroying its structure. Her spleen was enlarged, a sign of her body's ongoing struggle with inflammation and immune dysfunction. Her kidneys were small and scarred, showing the characteristic damage of chronic kidney disease. The deposits from her gout were visible, tiny white crystals scattered through the tissue like deadly snow. Her heart told its own tragic story. It was enlarged, the muscle thickened from years of strain trying to pump blood through a failing system. The valves showed signs of disease, possibly related to her autoimmune conditions. The chambers were dilated, stretched beyond their normal capacity. This was a heart that had been working overtime for years, gradually weakening until it could no longer keep up with the demands of keeping her alive. Her lungs showed signs of congestion, filled with fluid that had backed up from her failing heart. She had literally been drowning, unable to properly oxygenate her blood. Her digestive organs showed signs of chronic inflammation. Her intestines were damaged by years of poor circulation and the toxic effects of her failing kidneys. But it was her reproductive organs that captured the most attention. The uterus that had carried 17 pregnancies was a medical horror show. Scarred, damaged, with areas of necrosis where tissue had died. The fallopian tubes were blocked and damaged. The ovaries showed abnormalities suggesting hormonal dysfunction and repeated trauma. The physicians documented what they could, but the full significance of what they were seeing was beyond their understanding. They noted the corruption and putrefaction, the visible signs of organ failure. They observed the massive accumulation of fluid and the damage to her joints. But they couldn't identify the autoimmune processes that had driven much of the destruction. They couldn't diagnose the antiphospholipid syndrome that had killed her babies. They couldn't understand that her immune system had been attacking her own tissues for decades. What they could see was the end result: A body that had been systematically destroyed by processes medicine wouldn't fully understand for another 2 centuries. The autopsy report, incomplete as it was, became a crucial historical document. It provided evidence that modern medical historians would later use to reconstruct her likely diagnoses. But at the time, it was simply a catalog of incomprehensible destruction. The physicians had opened her body hoping to understand why she died. Instead, they found a biological mystery that raised more questions than it answered. But there was something else that haunted the medical examination: the realization of what had been done to her while she was alive. The treatments Queen Anne endured were supposed to save her. Instead, they likely accelerated her death. 18th century medicine was a bizarre combination of ancient superstition and misguided theory. The primary treatment for almost any ailment was bloodletting, and Anne was subjected to it repeatedly. Physicians would open her veins and drain significant amounts of blood, believing this would balance her humors and cure her ailments. For a woman already suffering from organ failure and poor circulation, this was catastrophic. Each session weakened her further, reducing her blood volume and her body's ability to carry oxygen to her struggling organs. During her pregnancies, bloodletting was considered especially important. Doctors believed it would prevent complications. In reality, it likely contributed to the deaths of her babies by reducing placental blood flow. She was bled when she had gout attacks, when she was swollen, when she was in pain. The treatment was universal, relentless, and deadly. Then there were the caustic treatments. For her gout and swelling, physicians applied burning plasters to her skin. These were compounds designed to blister and burn the surface of the skin, based on the theory that drawing out bad humors through the skin would cure internal diseases. The pain was excruciating. The burns often became infected. The treatment did nothing to address the underlying gout or kidney failure, but added infection and trauma to her already overwhelmed system. She was given mercury compounds, highly toxic substances that physicians believed would cure various ailments. Mercury poisoning causes kidney damage, neurological problems, and systemic toxicity. For someone whose kidneys were already failing, this was poison. She was given purgatives and emetics, drugs designed to make her vomit and have diarrhea, based on the belief that expelling substances from the body would cure disease. This caused dehydration and electrolyte imbalances, particularly dangerous for someone with heart and kidney failure. She was given opiates for pain, which provided some relief but also caused constipation and respiratory depression, complicating her already difficult breathing. During her pregnancies, the interventions were even more invasive and dangerous. When she went into labor, especially during the difficult births, physicians would sometimes attempt manual manipulation, reaching into the birth canal to try to reposition the baby or speed delivery. Without proper antiseptic technique, this frequently introduced infections. Puerperal fever, a bacterial infection of the reproductive tract following childbirth, was common and often deadly. Anne likely suffered from it multiple times, each bout leaving more scar tissue and damage. She was given various herbal preparations, some of which contained substances we now know are dangerous during pregnancy. She was advised to rest in ways that actually worsened her circulation problems. The medical wisdom of the time was not just ineffective, it was actively harmful. Every treatment, every intervention, every attempt to cure her was based on theories that were fundamentally wrong. The physicians weren't incompetent by the standards of their time. They were following the best medical knowledge available, but that knowledge was dangerously flawed. In trying to save the queen, they tortured her. In trying to preserve her pregnancies, they may have helped destroy them. She was a medical experiment gone horribly wrong, her body the testing ground for treatments that ranged from useless to lethal. Queen Anne died on August 1, 1714, ending the Stuart dynasty. She was 49 years old, but her body was that of someone much older, ravaged by disease and medical intervention. With her death, the crown passed to George I of Hanover, a distant German cousin who barely spoke English. The succession she had sacrificed her body to secure had ultimately failed. She left no surviving children, no direct heirs, just 17 graves and a body destroyed by the attempt. But her legacy extends far beyond dynastic politics. Her case became one of the most studied royal medical disasters in history. Modern physicians examining the historical evidence can now piece together what likely killed her. The combination of antiphospholipid syndrome, possible lupus, chronic kidney disease, gout, and heart failure created a cascade of biological failures. Each condition exacerbated the others, creating a downward spiral that 18th century medicine couldn't interrupt. Her 17 failed pregnancies weren't bad luck or divine punishment. They were the result of identifiable, treatable medical conditions that simply hadn't been discovered yet. Her story became a warning about what happens when reproductive trauma is left untreated and compounded. Modern medical students study her case as an example of how multiple organ systems can fail in concert, each failure amplifying the others. Rheumatologists point to her as a probable case of systemic autoimmune disease before such conditions had names. Obstetricians use her history to illustrate the importance of investigating recurrent pregnancy loss and treating underlying conditions. Cardiologists note how chronic kidney disease and gout can lead to heart failure. Her autopsy findings, limited as they were, provided crucial historical evidence about disease progression in an era before modern diagnostics. Medical historians have written extensively about her case, using it to understand both the diseases themselves and the evolution of medical knowledge. She represents a turning point in medical history, a case so extreme that it demanded explanation, even if that explanation wouldn't come for another 200 years. The cursed womb of Queen Anne wasn't supernatural. It was biological warfare, her immune system attacking the very possibility of life. The terrifying secret doctors found inside her was the evidence of this war, the scarred battlefield of her reproductive organs, the collateral damage in her other organ systems, the catastrophic failure of a body that had been pushed beyond its limits. Her square coffin stands as a memorial to that destruction, a wooden testament to what happens when disease goes untreated and medical science lacks the knowledge to intervene. She suffered 17 pregnancies that turned her organs into a graveyard. She endured treatments that poisoned rather than healed her. She died without the heir she sacrificed everything to produce. And in death, her body revealed secrets that medicine wasn't yet ready to understand. Queen Anne's autopsy showed what happens when the human body becomes its own worst enemy, when biological systems designed to create and sustain life instead destroy it. It's a secret so terrifying that it required a square coffin to bury it, and medical knowledge were still developing to fully comprehend it. If this deep dive into royal medical horror fascinated you, hit that subscribe button. This channel uncovers the darkest medical mysteries in history, the cases that changed medicine forever, and the secrets that were literally buried with their victims. Drop a comment telling me which historical medical case you want exposed next. And smash that like button if you made it this far, because understanding these terrifying truths is how we ensure they never happen again. The algorithm needs to know that real history, no matter how disturbing, deserves to be told.